Hello. Today I want to talk about George Russell. He's someone who doesn't always get as much attention as big names like Miles Davis or John Coltrane, but he had just as much as an impact on modern jazz as they did. Russell was born in 1923 in Cincinnati, Ohio, where he was adopted and raised by two nurses. In his teenage years, he started out as a drummer, then eventually turned towards the piano later in his life. In his teenage years, he was good enough that he even played briefly with Fletcher Henderson's band. This was a very big thing as this band was the best at the time. He didn't take the typical music school route as he did not obtain a college degree in jazz studies. Instead, he enlisted in the military during World War II, where he was diagnosed with tuberculosis. He spent a long time recovering in a hospital. Instead of giving up, he basically used that time to think deeply about harmony and form new ideas about jazz. He also listened to jazz religiously, and being in a hospital, he listened to it all the time, and this was one of the biggest sources for learning for him. After recovering from tuberculosis, he moved to New York and surrounded himself with many musicians, and eventually worked with people like Miles Davis, John Coltrane, Bill Evans, and many more. Later in his career, he started to teach and led bands around the globe, such as Scandinavia, which I found very interesting. George Russell, then later in his life, passed away in 2009 due to Alzheimer's disease. To me, it seemed like George Russell was something like a musical scientist in the way he created new ideas. One of the biggest ideas was called the Lydian chromatic concept. Instead of using the regular major scale that most people use, he believed the Lydian scale, which is just a major scale with the fourth note raised, created a more stable and a more open sound for improvisation. This idea helped push jazz into the era of modal jazz, which influenced the album Kinda Blue by Miles Davis. Even though Russell wasn't on the album, his thinking inspired a lot of music that came out during that time period, such as that album. George Russell's music did not sound like typical swing or bebop, which were the main ideas of jazz at the time. When you listen to it, the first thing you notice is how open and spacious it sounds. Russell loved using modes, especially his Lydian modes that created that space. This created a sound described as many as a floating sound. This also swayed away from the rush chord-to-chord sound and made his work sound smooth and rhythmical. It was also new and intriguing to audiences. There are a ton of things that make George Russell's music stand out, but these are some of the top things that set him apart. Russell loved playing with other sounds such as Latin rhythms and classical ideas. He believed that jazz was big and flexible enough to play a range of music. He also wanted to expand on what jazz could be. Due to his Lydian modes, his music was long and stretched out. It felt open and free. This left time in his music for artists to improvise and allowed them to show how they feel. His music was also bright and had layers with structures that created rhythm. He also used big jumps in his music, which gave his audience a feeling of exploration. In all, his music stood out because he was creating his own new musical language. Two pieces of George Russell's best work are Cubano Bay, Cubano Bop. In the description of this song, it blends Afro-Cuban rhythms with bold bass lines and modern harmonies. This song illustrates that many components of jazz can be formed together to create something new and exciting. It's also energetic and has a lot of sounds that influence the creation of this song. Another piece of work is All About Rosie. In this song, there is a lot of structured piano lines and harmonies that are unheard of. This allows the audience to feel curious as to what is next. George Russell's biggest impact came from his ideas. He developed something called the Lydian chromatic concept of tonal organization, which I explained earlier. This opened up new ways of improvisation and a more open-sounding jazz. However, after learning about Russell, I think the biggest impact he had was that he led people to believe that anyone can become a jazz artist and make an impact. Russell did not come from fame, nor money, nor even a college jazz education. He himself learned the music and in time revolutionized it. During the end of the 1950s, he became a band leader and led groups across the globe to spread his new way of jazz. Such places were Scandinavia, which I said earlier. Other places were Sweden and Norway. He even helped shape Nordic jazz, which led which when he led groups across the globe, he helped shape Nordic jazz. When he became a teacher, he transformed jazz education, where students now learn how to think of music in new independent ways instead of just learning how to play the music. George Russell helped create the idea that jazz was not just for pleasure or entertainment, but that it was art. Art that is intended to be studied and changed as time progresses. His work raised the idea of exploration for jazz, and the idea that anyone from anywhere can have a great influence on the sound of music. Thank you.